There is a sign outside a garage in Daytona Beach, Florida. It reads, "The best damn garage in town." It was put there by a man named Henry Yunick, who went by Smokey because of what happened to a barn when he was a teenager. That's a different story. The story that matters is what happened inside that garage for 3 decades. What one man did to the NASCAR rulebook, what NASCAR did to him in return, and why, at the end of it, both sides claimed they had won. NASCAR's official position on Smokey Yunick is complicated. They celebrate him now. They have inducted him into the Hall of Fame, acknowledged his genius, and placed him in the category of founding legends. What they are somewhat quieter about is the specific nature of that genius, the methodical, systematic, often breathtaking process by which Smokey found the distance between what the rulebook said and what the rulebook meant, and then operated in that distance for 30 years. Smokey called it engineering. NASCAR called it cheating. The difference between those two definitions is a story about who writes the rules and who figures out how to read them. Smokey Yunick arrived at Daytona Beach in 1946, fresh out of the Army Air Forces, with a background in aircraft maintenance and a mechanical intuition that had been sharpened by 2 years of keeping military aircraft airworthy under combat conditions. He opened his garage. He started working on cars, and when Bill France Sr. held the first strictly stock race at Charlotte in 1949, and then built Daytona International Speedway in 1959, Smokey was there. He worked with Chevrolet, with Pontiac, with Hudson, with anyone who could use what he knew. What he knew was engines, how they breathed, how they failed, how much punishment they could absorb before the physics stopped being negotiable. He also knew rulebooks, and the central insight that drove his entire career was this: a rulebook measures things. It does not measure all things. It cannot measure all things. The gap between what it measures and what it cannot measure is where the performance lives. His most famous single act came at the 1968 Daytona 500. The maximum fuel cell size under NASCAR rules was 22 gallons. Smokey's car showed up with a fuel tank that, when NASCAR inspectors measured it, read within the legal limit. The car passed inspection. It was cleared to race. After the race, inspectors looked at the car again. The fuel tank, they now determined, was significantly larger than the legal maximum. The car was disqualified. There was a discussion about what had happened. The version of events that has passed into legend is this: when officials told Smokey his car had failed post-race inspection and needed to be brought into compliance before he could leave, Smokey walked over to his car, removed the fuel cap from the allegedly empty tank, and drove the car back to his garage under its own power. The tank that had been measured as empty had enough fuel left to run the car to the pits. Let that settle. The tank had been measured. The measurement was accurate. The measurement was also irrelevant, because Smokey had modified the fuel lines, the fuel rails, and multiple other components in the system so that the volume the inspector was measuring was not the volume the car was actually carrying. The total fuel capacity of the system exceeded the limit. The individual component that was measured did not. This was not a lucky oversight. This was engineered. Smokey's techniques across 30 years of NASCAR competition have been cataloged by journalists, historians, and former competitors in numbers that vary depending on who's counting and what they're willing to put in print. The precise figure of 27 has been cited in various accounts. Smokey himself was deliberately vague about the total, because a man who tells you exactly how many ways he cheated is a man who has stopped using some of them. What is documented specifically and repeatedly are the techniques themselves. The intake manifold modification. NASCAR rules specified stock intake manifolds. Smokey would coat the inside of the intake ports with rosin wax, which filled the ports to the stock dimensions that inspectors measured. When the engine ran, the heat melted the wax, which was absorbed into the fuel, and the ports returned to the enlarged dimensions that Smokey had machined. What the inspector measured was compliant. What raced was not. The ride height trick. Rules required cars to meet minimum height specifications at inspection. Smokey's cars would arrive at inspection at the legal height. During the race, through a combination of shock absorber adjustments and suspension geometry choices that were legal but not widely understood, the car would settle lower, reducing aerodynamic drag through the corners and on the banking. When the car came back for post-race inspection, the height had returned to compliance. What was measured was compliant. What raced was lower. The engine displacement modifications. Rules specified maximum engine displacement. Smokey found that there was a difference between what displacement meant in the rules and what it meant in practice. By adjusting bore dimensions in ways that were geometrically compliant at the measuring points but produced a different effective displacement under combustion conditions, he extracted power from engines that, on paper, were within the limit. The body modifications. NASCAR's rules on body dimensions were precise about specific measurement points. Smokey understood that the aerodynamic behavior of a car body was not determined solely by the points being measured. By making subtle compound curves in body panels that fell within the legal tolerances at every measured point but produced a more aerodynamically efficient overall shape, he reduced drag in ways the rulebook had not anticipated and could not easily prohibit. The cylinder headwork. Rules specified stock cylinder heads. Stock cylinder heads have rough casting marks, imperfections in the ports, and flow characteristics that are limited by the manufacturing process rather than the laws of physics. Smokey's cylinder heads were stock in the sense that they were stock casting numbers. They were not stock in the sense that every internal surface had been finished to remove imperfections, every port had been matched to the manifold, and every combustion chamber had been CEC'd to achieve consistent volume. None of this was specifically prohibited. None of it was ignorant. The spark plug indexing. This one was entirely legal. Smokey understood that the position of the spark plug electrode within the combustion chamber affected the flame front propagation and therefore the efficiency of combustion. By indexing the plugs, selecting plugs whose electrode position, when torqued to specification, ended up in the optimal orientation, he extracted power that other teams were leaving in the combustion chamber. When teams asked why his engines made more power from the same parts, he told them. Most of them didn't believe it was that simple. Here's what it looked like from NASCAR's perspective. You have a man who arrives at every race with cars that are, as far as your inspectors can determine, legal. They pass inspection before the race. They sometimes fail it after the race. The before and after gap is filled with a race in which his cars are faster than everyone else's. You change the rules in response to what you found. His cars continue to be faster. You inspect more thoroughly. His cars continue to pass. What that looks like from the inside of an institution is not a mechanical problem. It is a philosophical one. Your rulebook assumes that the people following it are trying to understand what the rules intend. Smokey was not. He was trying to understand exactly what the rules said, the literal, measurable, specific language. And he was doing exactly what was described and nothing more. The gap between intent and language is not a cheater's problem to solve. It is the rule maker's. Smokey was disqualified multiple times. He was called before NASCAR officials. He was the subject of rule changes written specifically to close the gaps he had found. He regarded each new rule change as a compliment and a fresh puzzle. He also won 7 NASCAR Grand National Championships as a mechanic or car owner. He won at Daytona. He won at Talladega. He won with drivers who trusted him with cars that other teams knew without being able to prove were not entirely what they appeared to be. The irony that surrounds Smokey Yunick's legacy is that his techniques, stripped of the context that made them controversial, represent some of the most sophisticated mechanical thinking the sport has ever seen. The intake port finishing methods he used in secret in the 1960s are now standard preparation practice at every level of racing. The aerodynamic body modifications that bent the rules in 1968 are studied in engineering programs as examples of innovative thinking within constraints. The suspension geometry work that changed his car's handling characteristics during races contributed to understanding of dynamic vehicle behavior that has since been incorporated into legitimate race engineering. He was, in the most precise sense of the word, ahead of the rules. Not because he was willing to break them, because he understood them better than the people who wrote them. Smokey Yunick died in 2001. The best damn garage in town was closed and eventually demolished. NASCAR inducted him into the Hall of Fame in 2010. His biography, written by himself in 1992, is called Power, Money, and Sex, a title that tells you something about his opinion of the business of racing. The question that his career leaves open is the same question it posed while he was alive. At what point does superior understanding of the rules become something other than following them? Smokey's answer, consistent across 30 years of interviews and confrontations with NASCAR officials, was never complicated. He was a mechanic. He built fast cars. What other people called cheating, he called engineering. If the rulebook left a door open, that was the rulebook's problem. He was just walking through it. NASCAR has spent 60 years arguing that he was wrong about that. They've spent the same 60 years unable to prove it completely.